Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. Vani berov chastecha avovetecha eshtachave el hichal kodechecha b'yiratecha ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael.
Shabbat Shalom. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be back here. I'm Rabbi Michael Wolk here with Cantor Shira Lissick. We're happy to have you here in the sanctuary in our temple. We're happy to have people joining us over Zoom and over StreamSpot to celebrate Shabbat this morning. We open our Sidurim, Siddur Lev Shalem, to the beginning of the Shacharit service, page 147, the second paragraph, Shochenad.
Shochenad maharom v'kadosh shemo. בפי שרים תתהלל ובדברי צדיקים תתפרח ובלשון חסידים תתרומם ובקרב קדושים תתקדש ובמקלות רבבות עמך בית ישראל. וכן חובה כל יצורים לפניך אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואימותינו להודות, להלל, לשבח, לפאר, לרמם, להדר, לברך, להלל ולקלס כל דברי שירות ותשבחות דוד בן ישי עבדך משיחך.
Page 148, please rise.
ישתבח שמך לאדמתנו. ברכות והודות מעתה ועד עולם ברוך אתה אדוני אל מלך גדול בתשבחות אל ההודעות האדון הנפלאות הבוחר בשירי זמרה מלך אל חיי העולמים יתקדש ויתקדש שמי רבה ועמד דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי בחיי חון וביומך ובחסדך בית ישראל בגלה ובזמן קריב אמרו אמן יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עולמיה יתברך יתברך וישתבח ויפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו לעילם מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמא ואמרו אמן. La 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 baruchu et Adonai hamevorach baruch Adonai hamevorach le'olam va'ed le'olam va'ed la 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 la
Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who forms light while creating darkness, who brings harmony while creating all. May be seated, page 150.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, yotzer or uvorei choshech, oseh shalom uvorei et hakol. Hakol yoducha v'kol yishapucha v'kol kadosh Adonai. אפס פרצך גואלנו לימות המשיח, ואין דומה לך מושיענו לתחיית המתים. אל אדון על כל המעשים, ברוך ומבורך בפי כל נשמה, גודלו וטובו מלא עולם, דת ותבונה סובבים אותו, המתגאה על חיות הקודש ונדר בכבוד על המרכבה, זכות ומישור לפני כיסו, חסד ורחמים לפני כבודו, טובים מאורות שברא אלוהינו, יצרם בדעת, בבינה ובהשכל, כוח וגבורה נתן בהם, להיות מושלים בקרב תבל, מלאים זיו ומפיקים נוגה, נאה זיום בכל העולם, שמחים בצאתם וששים בבואם, עושים במה רצון קונם. פאר וכבוד נותנים לשמו, צהלה ורינה לזכר מלכותו, קרא לשמש ויזרח אור, רע והתקין צורת הלבנה, שבח נותנים לו כל צבע מרום, תפארת וגדולה, סרפים ואופנים וחיות הקודש, לאל אשר שווה מכל המעשים ביום השביעית עליו. יתברך משה שבח מעשה ידיך, ועל מאורי אור שעשית יפרוך הסלע. יתברך צורנו מגן וגואלנו בורא קדושים. כולם אהובים, כולם ברורים, כולם גיבורים, וכולם עושים במעביר הרצון קונם, וכולם פותחים את פיהם בקדושה ובטהרה, בשירה ובזמרה, ומברכים ומשבחים, ומפרים ומעריצים, ומקדישים וממליכים. את שם האל המלך הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, קדוש הוא. וכולם מקבלים עליהם עול מלכות שמיים זה מזה, ונותנים רשות זה לזה, להקדיש ליוצרם בנחת רוח, בשפה ברורה ובנימה קדושה, כולם כחרונים ואומרים ביראה, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך הארץ כבודו. והאופנים וחיות הקודש, ברעש גדול מנסים לעומת סרפים, לעומתם משבחים ואומרים, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. אור חדש על ציון תאיר, ונזכה כולנו מהרה לאורו, ברוך אתה אדוני, יוצר המאורות. אהבה רבה אהבתנו, אדוני אלוהינו, חמלה גדולה אמרת עלינו, אבינו מלכנו, בעבור אבותינו, שבטחו בך, אבינו מלכנו. ותלמדם חוקי חיים, כן תכוננו תלמדנו, אבינו אב הרחמן, המרחם רחם עלינו. ותן בליבנו להבין ולהשכיל לשמוע, ללמוד וללמד, לשמור ולעשות, ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך באהבה, והאר עינינו בתורתך, ודבק ליבנו במצוותיך, ויחד לבבינו לאהבה וליראה את שמך, ולא נבוש לעולם ועד, ולא נבוש לעולם ועד, כי בשם קודשך הגדול והנורא בטחנו, נגילה ונשמחה, נגילה ונשמחה בישועתך. אבינו לשלום ארבע כמות הארץ, ותוליכנו קוממיות לארצנו, כי פה ישועות אתה וברכת בכל ולשון, וקרבת לשמך הגדול סלע באמת, להודות לך ויחדך באהבה. ברוך אתה אדוני, הבוחר בעמו ישראל באהבה. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובישעריך, והיה אם שמוע תשמעו מצוותי אשר לכם אתכם היום. אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. לדור ודור הוא קיים ושמו קיים, וחיסון נכון בכתב ומונתו לה קיימת. ודבר וחיים וקיימים. אמת שאתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואימותינו, מלכנו מלך אבותינו ואימותינו, גואלנו גואל אבותינו ואימותינו, יוצרנו תור ישועתנו, פותנו הצילנו מעולם שמך, אין אלוהים זולתך, עזרת אבותינו ואימותינו אתה הוא מעולם, מגן משה לבני מאחרים בכל תור ותור, ומעולם משה לך
Moses, Miriam, and the people of Israel joyfully sang this song to you. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. Middle of page 158, please rise.
Tehillah le'layom baruch hu mevorach Moshe u'Miriam u'bnei Yisrael lechanu shira b'simcha rabba v'yamru chulam mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh Norat Eilot Osefele Shira Chadasha Shibchu Gilim Shimcha Sfatayam Yachad Kolam Huduvim Lichu V'Ameru Adonai Imloch Leolam Va'ed Tzur Yisrael Kuma B'Ezrat Yisrael Uftechinu Mecha Yehuda V'Yisrael Go'aleinu Adonai Tzevaot Shemo Kedosh Yisrael Baruch Atah Adonai Gal Yisrael.
Page 159, we begin the Shacharit Amidah together out loud.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu v'Imotenu Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak v'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel v'Elohei Leah Ha'el HaGadol HaGidol ve'Hanora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim Ve'koneh HaKol Ve'zocher Chasdei Avot ve'imahot U'mevi Goel Livnei B'neihem Leman Shemo Be'ahava Melech Ozer Ufoked U'Moshiach U'Magen Baruch Atah Adonai Magen Avraham Ufoked Sarah Atah Gibor Leolam Adonai V'chayei metim Atah Rav le'Hoshia Morid Hatal Mechalkel Chayim Bechesed Mechayei metim Berachamim Rabim Somech Noflim Verofei Cholim Umatir Asurim Umekayem Emunato Lishenei Afar Michamocha Baal Geburot Umido Melach Melach Memit Umechayeh Umatzmiach Yeshua Ramanat al Hachayot Mitim Baruch Atah Adonai Mechayeh HaMetim Nekadesh et Shimcha ba'olam Kishem shemakdishim oto mishmei marom Ka'katuv hayad neviecha V'karazel ze v'amar Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh Adonai Tzevaot Meloch ol haaretz kil אז בכל רעש גדול, אדיר וחזק משמיעים קול, מנשאים לעומת סרפים, לעומתם ברוך יאמרו, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו, ממקומך מלכנו. מלכנו תופיע ותמלוך עלינו כי מחכים אנחנו אנחנו לך. מתי תמלוך בציון. מתי תמלוך בציון. בקרוב בימינו, לעולם ועד תשכון. בקרוב בימינו, לעולם ועד תשכון. תתגדל ותתקדש, בתוך ירושלים עירך, לדור ודור, ולנצח נצחים. לדור ודור, ולנצח נצחים. ויעננו תירנה מלכותך, כדבר האמור בשירי עוזך, על ידי דוד משיח צדקך, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהי ציון, לדור ודור, הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו למושלי עולם ועד, כי המלך הטוב הקדוש אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש.
Continue silently.
עם שלום, טובה וברכה, חן וחסד ורחמים, עלינו ועל כל ישראל עמך. שים שלום, טובה וברכה, חן וחסד ורחמים, עלינו ועל כל ישראל, על כל ישראל עמך.
Page 167, Kaddish Shalem.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה.
אמן.
ועמד יברח חירותי במתמחותי בחייכון ובמכון ובחייזור בית ישראל, בגלה ובזמן קריב אמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם ולעולמי עולמיה, יתברך. יתברך וישבח ויבר ותרומה וינסה ויתזר ויצלה ויצלה שמי ריקוד שבריחו לילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעמה ואמרו אמן. תתקבל סולטון ובלטון זוכר ישראל קדם אבוהון וישמעי ואמרו אמן. יהי שם הרב ומן שמעי וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל ואמרו אמן. Amen.
Continue on page 168. Please rise for the beginning of the Torah service.
In kamocha v'Elohim Adonai, v'in kemasecha, malchutecha malchut kol olamim, u'memshaltecha b'chol dor v'dor. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. Adonai oz le'amo yitin, Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom. Av harachamim eitiv avirtzoncha et Zion. Tivne chomot Yerushalayim. Tivne chomot Yerushalayim. Ki vecha levad batachnu, melech el ram venisa Adon olamim. Vayehi binso Aharon vayomer Moshe, kum Adonai v'yafutu oivecha, v'yanusu misanecha mipanecha, ki mitzion tetzei Torah, ki mitzion tetzei Torah, u'devar Adonai miYerushalayim, Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah, Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah, le'amo Yisrael, b'kedushato.
We are the servants of the Holy One, whom we revere and whose Torah we revere at all times. Not on mortals do we rely, nor on angels do we depend, but on the God of heaven, the God of truth, whose Torah is truth, whose prophets are true, and who abounds in deeds of goodness and truth. In God do we put our trust, unto God's holy precious name do we offer praise. May it be your will that you open our hearts to your Torah, and you fulfill the desires of our hearts and the hearts of all your people Israel, for goodness, for life, and for peace. And let us say, Amen.
Be'anarachet velishme kadisha kadisha yakira ana emar tushbechan be'anarachet be'anarachet velishme kadisha kadisha yakira ana emar tushbechan yera avakadamach v'tiftach libi be'oraita v'tashlim nishalin delibi v'liba dechol amach Yisrael לטוב ולחיים ולשלום. אמן. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo. Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo. Gadol Adonai iti, uneromem Shemo yachtav. Lecha Adonai hagdula, v'hagvura, v'hatiferet, v'hanetzach v'hahod. Ki kol b'shamayim u'va'aretz, ki kol b'shamayim u'va'aretz. Lecha Adonai hamamlacha, v'habina lechol lerosh. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu, v'yishtachavu lehadom raglav, kadosh hu. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu, v'yishtachavu lehar kodsho, ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu, ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu, Romemu Adonai Eloheinu, v'yishtachavu lehar kodsho, v'yishtachavu lehar kodsho, v'yishtachavu lehar kodsho, v'yishtachavu lehar kodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu, Romemu Adonai Eloheinu.
May be seated. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Good morning. Good to have you in the sanctuary. Welcome to all the people joining us on Zoom and on StreamSpot. Our Torah portion this morning is the Parsha of Naso, the second portion in the book of Bimidbar, which can be found in the Eitz Chaim Chumashim, the top of page 796, beginning Numbers chapter 5, verse 11. And the portion of Naso that we read today, the second triennial section, is really focused on two sets of laws. We open with the description of what later rabbis referred to as the sota, the case of a husband who suspects his wife of adultery and subjects her to trial by ordeal at the hands of the priest. She stands in front of the altar and drinks a potion in which God's name has been erased. If she is innocent, then nothing will happen, but if she is guilty, she will suffer a grisly death. It is, to put it mildly, one of the more disturbing laws described in the Torah, and a set of laws that has caused discomfort to students of Torah for centuries, as far back as rabbinic times. There have been any number of attempts to explain it away, to try to make it sound less harsh, less terrible than it actually is, but it is, to me, they've always fallen a little bit flat, and I look at this section as reflecting the time in which it is written. But then immediately after reading about the sota, we will read about another person, the person known as the Nazir, the Nazarite. And this was a person who takes an oath to set him or herself apart from wider society. The person does this by swearing off of wine or any kind of alcohol or even any grape products, by not cutting the hair on his head, and by taking extra precautions against becoming ritually impure. The Nazarite is the closest that the Jewish tradition comes to the idea of a monk or a nun. Yet despite this set of laws in today's portion, asceticism, refraining from pleasures in life, is not a particularly Jewish value. In fact, the person who takes this vow of a Nazarite for a set period of time is obligated upon completing that vow to bring a sin offering in the temple once he returns to everyday life. He brings a sin offering because he is considered to have sinned by abstaining from living in the world that God created and by interacting fully, or refraining from interacting fully with other people. And rabbinic commentators have looked at these two sections, the section of the Sota and the section of the Nazir, and wondered why they are placed right next to each other. There's a principle of rabbinic and biblical interpretation called smichut parshiot, or the idea that different topics are deliberately juxtaposed, deliberately placed next to each other in the Torah to teach us something by their location. In this case, the Talmud teaches that a person who sees the case of the Sota, who sees something that happens to his neighbors, to a family that he knows, who sees the jealous husband and the suffering of the accused wife, will be so disturbed that he will give up intoxicants, which he blames for this problem, and will stay away from other people, will make himself into this hermit, into this ascetic monk. But of course, by the end of his vow, he may come to regret this choice, and that is why he offers the sin offering to bring himself back into regular life. And it's an interesting dynamic that's set up between the Sota, between the Nazarite, and then giving the sin offering. It's a dynamic that we should be familiar with, because we know that we will often see or experience something that we don't like, and in response, go to the extreme in the other direction. Run as far away from that as we can. In my particular field, in the field of clergy, it's very interesting to see when congregations have a less than amicable split with the clergy, a rabbi or a cantor, and it's true in churches as well. Their first impulse will be to find somebody who is completely opposite of the person who just left. And only with time are they able to look and see what they liked and what they didn't like. But it's true in many areas of life that when we don't like something, we run far away from it and often regret that particular choice. It's very true for us right now as we step back into regular life, as we step back into the world and interactions with people, much like the Nazarite. We've spent a great deal of time separating ourselves from others, acting in ways that we would have described before the last 14 months as very extreme. But then to hop back into regular life as if nothing happened, as if we can easily return to that, is also difficult and often causes a feeling of whiplash of, what am I doing? Am I ready for this? And so we learn from the Talmud in this particular case that going to an extreme to run away from a situation that you didn't enjoy is not always the right response. To consider carefully what were the good points and what were the low points of that particular situation. So we read Parashat Naso, these two sections of the Torah, the Sota and the Nazarite, and then we'll conclude it with the section of Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing, the blessing that the priests use to bless the people and which has become a major part of our liturgy. We open our Torah reading, page 796, Numbers chapter 5, verse 11. Our Torah reading will be a hybridized Torah reading. Some people joining us over Zoom and some people in person. Our opening Torah reader will be Perry Tannenbaum, and for this Aliyah, we call on David Strauss.
ויעזור ויגן וישלח חוסים בו ונאמר אמן הכל וגודל וניתנו כבוד לתורה יעמוד יוסף בן אליעזר ברוך נתן תורה לעמו ישראל בקדושתו ואתם מדבקים באדוני אלוהיכם חיים כולכם היום.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach, Baruch et Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch
Baruch leolam vaed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach le'olam vaed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bacharbanu mikol hamim v'natalanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. וידבר אדוני אל משה לאמור, דבר בני ישראל, ואמרת עליהם, איש כי תסטה אשתו, ומעלבו ומעל, ושכב איש אותה שכבת זרע, ונעלם מעיני אישה, ונסתרה והיא נטמעה, ואין בה, והיא לא נתפסה, ועבר עליו רוח קנאה, וקינא את אשתו והיא נטמעה, או עבר עליו רוח קנאה, וקינא את אשתו והיא לא נטמעה, והביא האיש את אשתו אל הכהן, והביא את קרבנה עליה, עשירית האפה כמחסונים, לא יצוק עליו שמן, ולא ייתן עליו לבונה, כי מנחת קנאות הוא, מנחת זיכרון מזכרת עוון.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natalanu Torah emet v'chayei olam notan v'tuchenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. David Yasher Koach. David is marking the yortzeit this week of his grandmother, Sarah Levi Strauss of blessed memory. I'll recite the Male, the memorial prayer, in her memory in just a moment. David, would you share something about your grandmother?
Well, she was always living for the betterment of her grandchildren and her son Leonard and Sammy. Her family was the most important thing for her, and I hope that we can live up to that example.
Live up to that. Okay, I'll recite this memorial prayer in her honor. El male rachamim mishochein b'amromim ametzei menucha nechona tachah kanfei hashchina b'ma'alot kiroshim u'tahorim k'zorkim mazirim et nishmat Sarah Levi Strauss shalcha le'olama v'gan eden tehei menuchata ana bala rachamim astireha b'seiter kenafecha le'olamim u'tzeror b'tzrochai menishmata adonai nachalata v'tanuach b'shalom amishkava v'nomar Amen. Her memory should always be for a blessing. Yasher Koach David. For the second Aliyah, we call on Eric Levine.
Yamdu, Yamon Esa ben Shlomo Levi.
Continue Numbers chapter 5, verse 16, page 797.
Parshiot Adonai Hamvarah.
Baruch Adonai Baruch leolam vaed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch leolam vaed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bacharbanu mikol ami v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
אמן, והקריב אותה הכהן, והעמידה לפני אדוני, ולקח הכהן מים קדושים בכלי חרש, ומן העפר אשר יהיה בקרקע המשכן, ייקח הכהן, ונתן אל המים, והעמיד הכהן את האישה לפני אדוני, ופרע את ראש האישה, ונתן על כפיה את מנחת הזיכרון, מנחת קנאות היא, וביד הכהן יהיו מי המרים המערערים, והשביע אותה הכהן, ואמר אל האישה, אם לא שכב איש אותך, ואם לא סטית טומאה תחת אישך, הנקי ממי המרים המערערים האלה, ויד כי סטית תחת אישך וכי נטמאת, וייתן איש בך שכבתו מבלעדי אישך, והשביע הכהן את האישה בשבועת העולם, ואמר הכהן לאישה, ייתן אדוני אותך לעלה ולשבועה בתוך עמך, בתית אדוני את ירכך נופלת, את בטנך צבא, ובאו המים המערערים האלה במייך, לצבות בטן ונלפיל ירך, ואמרה האישה אמן אמן, וכתב את העולות האלה הכהן בספר, ומכר אל מי המרים, והשקע את האישה את מי המרים המערערים, ובאו המים המערערים למרים, ולקח הכהן מיד האישה את מנחת הקנאות, והניף את המנחה לפני אדוני, והקריב אותה אל המזבח, וקמץ הכהן מן המנחה את אזכרתם, והקטיר המזבח, ואכל ישקה את האישה את המים.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, vayeh olam natav botenu. Baruch atah Adonai notena Torah.
Amen. Eric, Yasher Koach, I know you're celebrating with your wife Nancy your 32nd wedding anniversary this week. What's something you remember about your wedding? What's something that you treasure about that?
Well, initially we were sort of vacillating. We were actually members of Bethel for a while, and we came back to Israel. Israel Gerber is the rabbi that married us, who's since passed away. Of course, now we've been members of Temple Israel for a long time. I don't know what else to say. I mean, it is 32 years.
32 years and it still sticks. We wish a mazel tov to you and Nancy and hope she's back on her feet soon.
Thank you very
Can
much.
Cantor Lissick give you a Mishaberach blessing in honor of your anniversary?
מי שברך אבותינו אברהם יצחק ויעקב ואימותינו שרה רבקה רחל ולאה ויברך את עיסא בן שלמה ונעמי בעבור שבאו היום להודות לשם קודשו על כל החסד אשר גמל להם מיום חתונתם ומיום שמיכת ליבם עד היום הזה הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמרם מכל צרה וצוקה ומכל נגע ומחלה וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיהם עם כל ישראל אחיהם ונאמר אמן.
Mazel tov. May you and Nancy enjoy many more happy years together. We continue with the third Aliyah, page 799, Numbers chapter 5, verse 27. We call on Irving and Teresa Brenner.
יעמדו יצחק בן ולבל ורבקה וחנה בת אברהם ושרה שלישי.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach leolam vaed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach leolam vaed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et Torah. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Our reader is Art Roth.
Amen. V'hishka et hamayim, v'hayata'im nitama, timome abisha, uba hamayim, hamarim lamarim, v'tzavta bitna v'nafla yurecha, v'hayata ha'isha la'ala b'kerev ama, Imlo nitma ha'isha utarahi v'nikta mizra zaram zotarad haknod asher tista isha tachas isha v'nitma oish asher tavor lo ruach kina v'kine et ishta v'hamid et ha'isha lifnei Adonai V'asala hakohen et kol haTorah hazot v'nikah ha'ish me'avon v'ha'isha hahi yisa et avonam v'daber Adonai Moshe lemor daber el b'nei Yisrael v'marta alehem isha ki yafli lindur neder nazir lahazir l'Adonai Miyayin v'sheichar yazir chometz yayin v'chometz sheichar lo yishteh v'chom mishrad anavim lo yishteh anav anavim v'chim v'veishim lo yecham kol yemei Yisrael mikol asher yaseh migefen hayayin Mechart Sonim Yadzog Lo Yechel.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam notah b'tocheinu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Irving and Teresa, this is a really big week for you.
Yeah.
You're celebrating your 30th wedding anniversary, and soon you're going to share your anniversary week with another couple, 30 years younger approximately, maybe a bit more. Your daughter, Rebecca, and her fiance, Brian, are getting married this week in St. Louis, and we wish you a huge mazal tov and are so excited for this addition to your family. And I think I saw Rebecca coming in on Zoom. I don't know if she wants to say hello. Well, you don't have to put her on the spot. Nice to have you with us today, Rebecca. But what's something that you remember? Is she there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hello,
Congratulations,
Rebecca.
Mom and Dad. Happy 30th wedding anniversary.
So what's something that you remember about your wedding 30 years ago?
Well, as I told Rebecca after so much planning for the wedding, that there's really only one important thing in a wedding. For her, it's the identity of the groom. And I felt the same way at our wedding and felt like I had been very fortunate to have the right person identified to be my wife. So it's turned out that way.
Choosing the right person. That's the best thing you can remember about a wedding.
That is beautiful.
Anything you remember, Teresa?
A lot of happiness and hope, and I'd say all of those dreams and hopes have come true and even more. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful life so far, and we're looking forward to many more years together.
Mazel tov.
Beautiful.
Cantor Lissick blesses you in honor of your 30th anniversary.
May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac,
Says
and
I
Jacob,
can't.
Sarah, Becca,
See, they don't know.
bless Irving and Teresa Brenner, who are here today with gratitude for all the blessings of their 30 years together have afforded them. May the Blessed Holy One protect and deliver them. May they continue to enjoy God's blessings in the years to come and always live in joy and gladness, in peace and companionship. And let us say Amen. בעבור שבאו היום להודות לשם קודשו, על כל החסד אשר גמל להם מיום חתונתם ומיום שמחת ליבם, עד היום הזה הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמרם ויצילם מכל צרה וצוקה ומכל נגע ומחלה, וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיהם, עם כל ישראל אחיהם, ונאמר אמן. סימן טוב ומזל טוב ומזל טוב וסימן טוב, סימן טוב ומזל טוב ומזל טוב וסימן טוב, סימן טוב ומזל טוב ומזל טוב וסימן טוב. יהי לנו, יהי לנו, יהי לנו, ולכל ישראל. יהי לנו, יהי לנו, ולכל ישראל.
Mazel tov to the Brenners on your wedding 30 years ago and on the upcoming wedding this week. We continue with the fourth Aliyah, Numbers chapter 6, verse 5, page 800. Art Roth will keep reading, and we call on Elliot and Stephanie Meadow.
יעמדו חיים ישראל בן רפאל וצ'רנה פריבה ושרה בת לזר ומלכה רבי.
Baruch hu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai Mevorach leolam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Mevorach leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Kol yemei neder nizra, tar lo yavur arosha, amalot hayamim, asher yazir ladonoi, kodosh yeh, gadil paras arosha, kol yemei hazira ladonoi, al nefesh meit lo yavo, lo aviv ulima, lo chiv ul achota, lo yitama lohem b'motam ki, Nazir Alahav Arosha, Kiyamet, Kol Yemei Nizra, Kodoshu Ladonoi.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torat emet, v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Elliot and Stephanie, Yasher Koach. Elliot, first time I've seen you wearing a tie, I think, and what a tie it is.
And there you go. Yes.
We want to wish you a Mazal Tov. You're tied with Irving and Teresa for celebrating your 30th wedding anniversary this week.
Thank you.
And before we give you a blessing, what's something that you remember from your wedding day?
On our wedding day, Stephanie and I learned the importance and the challenges of our families. It set a tone for the next 30 years.
You say the importance and challenges of your families.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm sure there's some interesting stories behind that.
Yes, there are. Not the time to go into.
Fair enough. That's what therapy is for. Cantor, would you give them a blessing?
This time I'll go with just the Hebrew, but you all know the English part. So. Mishaber Achavotenu Arba Mitzvah Yaakov, V'imotenu Sara Rivka Rachav Leah, ויברך את חיים ישראל בן רפאל וצ'רנה פריבה ושרה בת לעזר ומלכה, בעבור שבאו היום להודות לשם קודשו על כל החסד אשר גמל להם מיום חתונתם ומיום שמחת ליבם עד היום הזה. הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמרם ויצילם מכל צרה וצוקה ומכל נגע ומחלה, בשלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיהם עם כל ישראל אחיהם, ונאמר אמן. לחיים טובים ושלום, לחיים טובים ושלום, לחיים טובים, לחיים טובים ושלום.
Mazel Tov, Elliot and Stephanie. Yasher Koach. Well, we've had a 32nd anniversary and two 30th anniversaries, but taking the lead, we now call on a couple celebrating their 34th wedding anniversary. Cantor Elias and Linda Rushvarg will have the fifth Aliyah, Numbers chapter 6, verse 9, page 801.
יעמדו החזן אליהו בן מיכאל ועדה, ולאה רבקה בת משה ושרה חמישי.
ברכו את אדוני המבורך.
ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד.
ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו את תורתו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
אמן.
Amen. V'chi yomud meid. Allah b'petah pitam. V'timei rosh nizro. V'gilach rosha b'yom taharto. B'yom hashvi'i yigachenu. V'yom hashmini yavi shtei terim. Oshnei b'nei yonah. El hakohen el petach ohel moed. V'yosah hakohen. Echor lechatot v'echor la'olah v'chiper alav me'asher hachata al hanefesh v'kidash et rosho b'yom hahu v'hizir l'Adonai et yemei nizro v'hevi keves ben shnoto le'asham v'hayomim harishonim yiplu Ki tamen nos nizro, v'zotaras hanazir b'yom, melod yemei nizro, yovioto el petach ohel moed, v'ikriv et karbono, l'Adonai keves, v'shnoto tamim echor la'olam, v'kavso achat v'shnoto tamimim, L'chata v'yilecha tamim lishlamim v'samatzot solet chalot v'lula b'shemen urkikei matzos mishuchim b'shamen u'michata v'nizkehem.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torat emet, v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Cantor, Elias, and Linda, 34 years. Linda, what's it been like being married to him for 34 years?
I was hoping you were going to ask him first.
I can pick on other clergy.
But that wasn't the question that I thought you were going to ask.
Okay, well, tell us something you remember about your wedding.
Okay,
Clergy weddings are always interesting.
Okay.
Doctor weddings are also interesting, I'm sure.
I think a couple things that I remember the most were all the chazanim who were at our wedding and at our reception. Elias was part of a trio, so they sang at our wedding, and Elias sang to me a special song at our wedding. And so having that kind of music was not something that I was used to. It was beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Began a lifetime of enjoying music together.
He doesn't sing much to me anymore.
He doesn't sing to you anymore?
Not much.
Oh, okay. What did he sing on that day? Does he remember?
I do remember. It was the Bette Midler version of The Rose.
Beautiful.
And Chazan, what do you remember about that day?
The night before the wedding at the hotel where I and my father and all our guests were staying, at about midnight, the fire alarm went off. And so all the guests had to make their way down and outside and were milling around in their pajamas until it was discovered that there had also been a high school prom that night. And one of the kids from the prom had sent in the fire alarm. So the guests at my wedding were a bit sleep deprived, but I think they all had a good time anyway.
You know, when you start a story with the night before the wedding,
Yeah.
set big expectations there.
And then the prom night.
Mazal tov. Let's give them a blessing.
מי שברך אבותינו ויצחק ויעקב ואמותינו שרה רבקה רחל ולאה ויברך את החזן אליהו בן מיכאל ועדה ולאה רבקה בת משה ושרה בעבור שבאו היום לכבוד להודות לשם קודשו על כל החסד אשר גמל להם מיום חתונתם ומיום צמיחת ליבם עד היום הזה הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמרם ויצילם מכל צרה וצוקה ומכל נגע ומחלה וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיהם עם כל ישראל אחיהם ונאמר אמן לחיים טובים ושלום לחיים טובים ושלום לחיים טובים לחיים טובים ושלום.
Mazel tov. May you enjoy many more years together, hopefully without the masks. We continue on page 802, Numbers chapter 6, verse 16. Our Torah reader will be Dan Biber, and for this Aliyah, we call on Bill Gorelick.
יעמוד זאב בן ישראל שישי.
You're up, Bill.
Then they must want you to speak, but you
We
can't.
can hear you.
Can you hear me?
We can hear
Very
you. Bill.
good. Well, I didn't realize that I cannot see. It's I have macular degeneration and it's very bad. So I have been searching a prayer book that would work. So anyway, I wanted to honor my brother with this Aliyah, and I'm unable to say all the prayers because I don't have anything in before me. Like I really should be at the temple. So therefore,
Bill, I'll recite the Aliyah blessing for
they're
you.
very
And after
good.
the Aliyah, would you tell us something about Shelton?
Yes, I will.
All right, so I'm going to recite the blessing.
Thank you.
Baruch hu et Adonai Amvorach.
Baruch Adonai Amvorach leolam
Baruch.
va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Amvorach leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Man. Okay. Who is on? Am I on now? No. No. Right. Yes.
You're here, but maybe you
ונתן על כפי הנזיר אחר התקלחות נזרו וניב אותם הכהן תנופה לפני אדוני קודש הוא לכהן על חזת תנופה ועל שוקת תרומה ואחר ישתה נזיר יין זאת תורת הנזיר אשר ידור קורבנו לאדוני על נזרו מלבד אשר תשיג ידו כפי נדרו אשר ידור כן יעשה על תורת נזרו.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
So Bill, as he told us, is marking the yahrzeit of his brother Shelton, the relic of blessed memory. And before we recite the memorial prayer, Bill, would you tell us something about Shelton? You are muted still, Bill.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Good, good. Shelton he is 5 years older than I am, and he came to Charlotte in 1933, I think. And so he was about, he came with my parents. I was born here, and he was a very good soul. We were in business together for many, many years, all of his life, until we retired. He was married to a lovely lady, and then he got divorced, and then he became the bride of a new lady, and he lived with her about 25 years. He lived with the first one 25
How
years.
everybody thought he was such a good person.
And he was just a very good person.
He was on the hospital board.
He was on the hospital board. He was a member of Temple Israel for many, many years. And he was just a good guy. He, as far as the business went, we were partners, but I ran the business and he talked to and ran the financing of the business. So it was a very good combination. But anyway, he was just a good guy, and I will miss him forever. And I wanted to honor him with this Aliyah. And he and I both, as something I think we gave the windows of the temple, which are very, very nice. And and it was in honor of my parents, but actually now it could be also in honor of my brother. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Welcome. And I will tell you that when people walk into the sanctuary, I know that they are overwhelmed by the windows. They add to the religious feeling of being in this room. We honor Shelton today on his yahrzeit.
Yes.
V'malot kiroshim u'torim k'zorakim azirim et nishmat hamechuna Shelton Gorelik shehalach le'olamo b'gan eden tehei menuchato ana bal harachamim astirehu b'seiter kinafecha le'olamim u'tzeror b'tzrachem nishmato Adonai unachalato v'yanuach b'shalom amishkavo v'nomar
Amen.
Amen. His memory should always be for a blessing, Bill. We continue with the 7th Aliyah, Numbers chapter 6, verse 22, page 804. Call on Steve Zaks. Where'd he go? Steve and Janice Zaks.
Baruch et Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Amen.
Amen. V'adaber Adonai el Moshe lemo. Daber al Aaron ve'al banav lemo. Ko tivarchu et pnei Yisrael emor lahem. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Ya'ir Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. V'samu et shmi al bnei Yisrael v'ani avarchem.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam natan b'tochenu Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Stephen, Janice, Yasher Koach, great to have you here. Not celebrating anything particular, but just great to have you. Or are you celebrating anything?
Jacob just graduated college.
Mazel tov.
Yay, mazel tov.
Mazel tov. Congratulations. We pause for a moment to pray on behalf of those who are ill, those in our lives in need of physical and spiritual well-being. With this prayer, we think of Hannah Miriam bat Rivka, Avram Mordechai ben Fega, Tamar bat Rachel Yehuda, Rav Yaakov Chai ben Hadassah, Shimon ben Yaakov Mordechai ben Naomi, Devorah bat Sarah, Hershel Yehoshua ben Malka, Perel bat Rezel, Dov ben Ita, Shmuel Yaakov ben Kalia va'ari, Devorah Rachel, Malka bat Sarah, Leib Yisrael ben Sipora, Aliza Meira bat Leah, Tzivya bat Chana, Yudit bat Miriam, Meira Bracha bat Chana, Tzipora bat Chasha, Fegla bat Chasha, Arya ben Malka, Rachel bat Ruth, Harav Moshe Al-Hanan ben Rav Avraham Halevi, Kalman Pinchas ben Moshe be'eta, Sarah bat Chaya, Chanoch Yitzchak ben Sarah, Sarah bat Shendel, Binyamin Noah, Ever Yitzchak, Yosef ben Miriam, Shiri Ruth Batya bat Yaakov Yerushalayim, Ciro ben Moshe Kalman, Miriam Tzivya bat Aaron Vitova, Chava Charna bat Zev Dov, Leah bat Tzvi Zisala, Chaim Yitzchak ben Gittel Fagel, Howard and Beverly Kaufman, Elijah Villa, Jordana Faith Ram, Mabel Tannenbaum, Kathy Berlin, Maxine Albaum, Sandra Harrell, Don Roth, Philip LaMancha, Tamara Rivera, Tracy Albridge, and Ira Tidoff. I invite you to recite the names of anyone else you'd like to include in the prayer today. Misha Berach.
Misha Berach Avotenu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misha Berach Imotenu Mekor HaBracha Leavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
Please rise for the Chatzi Kaddish.
יתקדש ויתקדש שמי רבה.
אמן.
ועמד יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי כל בית ישראל. בקלה בקלה ובזמן קריב אמרו אמן. ישמר רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עולמיה. יתברך, יתברך, וישתבח, ויפאר ותרומה וינשא, יתהדר, ויתעלה, ויתהלך, שמי קודשה, בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, ושפחתה ונחמתה, גם איראן מעלמה וימרו, אמן.
May be seated. We turn ahead for the Maftir reading to page 811, Numbers chapter 7, verse 87. Hanukkah is in the air because this is part of the Torah reading that we read on the 8 days of Hanukkah. In fact, this is the reading for the 8th day of Hanukkah. Page 811, verse 87. For the Maftir Aliyah, we call on Karen Brodsky.
Talmud Maftir.
Baruch hu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Kol habakar le'olah, 12 parim. Elim shnai, 12 כבשים בני שנה, 12 ומנחתם. ושעירי עזים 12 לחטאת, וכובע כזב השלמים 24 פרים, אלים 60, עתידים 60, כבשים בני שנה 60, זאת חנוכת המזבח אחרי משכותו, ובבוא משה אל מועד לדבר איתו, וישמע את הקול מדבר אליו, מעל הכפות אשר על אהרון העדות מבין שני הקרובים, וידבר אליו.
מנשה.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Aaron, before we lift the Torah, we'd like to mark one more yahrzeit. Heidi Rotberg is marking the second yahrzeit of her husband, Michael Rotberg of blessed memory, and we'll recite the mole in his memory in just a moment. Could you share something about Michael? Thank you. Recite the mole in his memory. El mole rachamim shochein bamromim ametzei menucha nechona tachak kanfei hashchina b'malot kedoshim utehorim kezorakim azirim et nishmat Menashe ben Eliyahu hakohen shahalach leolamo began Eden tehei menuchato ana bal harachamim astirehu beseter kenafecha leolami mutzeror b'tzrachem nishmato Adonai nachalato Yanuach b'shalom mishkavo v'nomar. Amen. His memory should be for a blessing. And excited to celebrate a simcha with you later this year. Invite everyone to please rise for Hagba and Galila. Call on Brian Ablitz to lift the Torah and Ezra and Arya Ablitz to dress the Torah.
Yamdu hamagbiya v'hagolelim. וזאת התורה אשר שם משה לפני בני ישראל, על פי אדוני ביד משה. וזאת התורה אשר שם משה לפני אשר שם משה לפני בני ישראל ביד משה.
May be seated. The Haftarah for Naso that Karen is going to chant can be found on page 813. Judges chapter 13, verse 2. We read the portion in the Torah about the Nazarite, man who takes a vow to abstain from worldly pleasures. And the Haftarah tells the beginning of the story of the most famous Nazarite in Jewish history, birth of Samson the Mighty. And it's interesting to note the story in this Haftarah that even though he is a Nazarite, his story is very different than that of the Nazarite described in the Torah. It's something that that his parents swear on his behalf from the time that he is born. So Karen chants the Haftarah, the story of Samson, page 813.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nbiim tovim v'ratza b'divreihem hanemarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai Abocher b'Torah u'v'Moshe avdo u'v'Yisrael amo u'v'nviei ha'emet v'tzedek.
Amen.
Vayehi ish echad mitzvah מממשפחת הדני ושמו מנוח ואשתו עקרה ולא ילדה. יורה מלאך אדוני אל האישה ויאמר אליה הננה את עקרה ולא ילדת בהרים וילדת בן ואתה השמרי נא ואל תשתי יין ושכר ואל תאכלי כל טמא כי הנך ahara ויולדת בן ומורה לא יעלה על ראשו כי נזיר אלוהים אדוני יהיה הנהר מן הבטן והוא יחל להושיע את ישראל מיד פלישתים. ותבוא האישה ותאמר לאישה לאמור איש האלוהים בא אלי ומראהו כמראה מלאך האלוהים נורא מאוד ולא שאלתיהו את מי זה ואת שמו לא הגיד לי ויאמר לי הנה הרה ויולדת בן ואתה אל תשתי יין ושכר ואל תאכלי כל תרומה כי נזרי אלוהים יהיה הנהר מן הבטן עד יום מותי. ויתר מנוח אל אדוני ויאמר כי אדוני איש האלוהים אשר שלחת ויבוא נא עוד אלינו ויורנו מה נעשה לנער היולד וישמע אלוהים בקול מנוח ויבוא מלאך האלוהים עוד אל האישה והיא יושבת בשדה ומנוח אישה אין עמה ותמהר האישה ותרץ ותנהג לשיעה ותאמר אליו הנה נראה אלי האיש אשר בא ביום אלי ויקם הילד מנוח אחרי אשתו אל האיש ויאמר לו אתה האיש אשר דיברתי אל האיש ויאמר אני ויאמר מנוח אתה יבוא דברך מה יהיה משפט הנער ומעשהו ויאמר מלאך אדוני אל מנוח מכל אשר אמרת אל האיש תשמר מכל אשר יצא מגפן היין לא תאכל ויין ושחר אל תשת וכל תרומה אל תאכל כל אשר ציווית תשמיד ויאמר מנוח אל מלאך אדוני נעצרה אותך ונעשה לפניך גזיזים ויאמר מלאך אדוני אל מנוח אם תרציני לא אוכל בלחמך ואם תעשה אוהבה לאדוני תעלנה כי לא ידע מנוח כי מלאך אדוני הוא ויאמר מנוח אל מלך אדוני כי שמך כי יבוא דברך וקיבצנוך ויאמר לו מלאך אדוני למה זה תשאל לשמו והוא פלי ויקם מנוח העזים את המנחה ויעל על הצאן לאדוני ומה לעשות ומנוח ואשתו רואים ויהי בבעלות הלכה מעל המזבח השמיימה ויעל מלך אדוני בלב המזבח ומנוח ואשתו רואים ואפילו ליפהן על פניהם ארצה ולא יסף עוד מלאך אדוני להיראו אל מנוח ואל אשתו אז ידע מנוח כי מלאך אדוני הוא ויאמר מנוח Elishto Mod Namot Ki Elohim Ra'inu Vatamar Lo Ishto Lo Chafetz Adonai La Mitenu Lo Lachat Miadenu La Mincha Velo Hirenu Et Kol Elah Vikatet Lo Hishmianu Kazot Vatelech Isha Ben V'tikra et Shemo Shimshon Vaygadel Hana'ar Vayvarecheu Adonai Vatahel Ruach Adonai Liamo Bimhananu Ben Sarah Uvein Eshta'o Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam tzur kol ha'olamim tzadik b'chol hadorot ha'el ha'ne'eman ha'omer v'yoseh ha'medaber u'mekayim shekol divarav emet v'tzedek ne'eman atahu Eloheinu atahu Adonai Eloheinu v'ne'emanim devarecha V'davar echad midvarecha achor lo yashuv rekam ki el melech ne'eman v'rachaman atah baruch atah Adonai ha'el ha'ne'eman b'chol divarav rachem al Zion ki hivev chayenu v'la'aluvat nefesh toshia b'mheira v'yameinu baruch atah Adonai Mesamech Zion b'vaneha Samcheinu Adonai Eloheinu B'Eliyahu Hanavi Avtecha U'v'malchut Beit David Meshichecha B'mheira Yavo V'yagel Libeinu Al Kiso Lo Yeshev Zar V'lo Yinchalu Od Achirim Ekavodo Ki V'shem Kodshecha Nishbatalu Shelo yichben ero leolam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai Magen David Al HaTorah V'al HaAvodah V'al HaNivim V'al Yom HaShabbat Hazeh Shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu Likdusha v'limnucha Lechavod u'tifaret Al HaKol Adonai Eloheinu Anachnu modim lach u'mvarchim otach Yitbarech Shimcha B'fi chol chai tamid le'olam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai Megaden Shabbat
Amen. Yasher kochech, Karen. Thank you. We turn back in the Sidurim to page 177. I invite everyone to please rise and join with me in a prayer for our country, the United States of America. Our God and God of our ancestors, with mercy accept our prayer on behalf of our country and its government. Pour out your blessing upon this land, upon its inhabitants, upon its leaders, its judges, officers, and officials who faithfully devote themselves to the needs of the public. Help them understand the rules of justice you have decreed, so that peace and security, happiness and freedom will never depart from our land. Adonai, God, whose spirit is in all creatures, we pray that your spirit be awakened within all the inhabitants of our land. Uproot from our hearts hatred and malice, jealousy and strife. Plant love and companionship, peace and friendship among the many peoples and faiths who dwell in our nation. Grant us the knowledge to judge justly, the wisdom to act with compassion, and the understanding and courage to root out poverty from our land. May it be your will that our land be a blessing to all who dwell on earth, and may you cause all peoples to dwell in friendship and freedom, Speedily fulfill the vision of your prophets. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. For all of them, from the least of them to the greatest, shall know me. And let us say, Amen. I think if we think about the two words that we use interchangeably, shalom and peace, we think they mean the same thing, but they actually have different connotations. Peace comes from the Latin word pax, and generally was used to indicate a period of quiet, a time in between two difficult periods, two periods when there was not quiet. In contrast, shalom comes from the word shlemut, wholeness, completeness, a time when there's not just quiet in between two wars, but actual peace. And we are thankful right now that there, as of the last time I saw the news, that there were no rockets being launched from Gaza and no counterstrikes being launched from Israel into Gaza. But ultimately we know that it is pax, it is not a full shalom. So we continue to look ahead to a time, pray for a time, and hopefully make the world ready for a time when Israel can live at peace, at shalom with its neighbors. We pray together on behalf of the state of Israel, page 178. Avinu Shabashamayim, Tzor Yisrael v'goalo, Barech Medinat Yisrael, Shetehei Reshit Smichat Gulatenu. Hagen Aleha Be'evrat Chastecha, Ufros Aleha Sukat Shlomecha, Ushlach Orcha v'Amitcha L'Rosheha Sareha v'Yoatzeha, V'Taknem Be'etzah Tova Milfanecha. Chazek et yedei meginei eretz kodshenu, v'hanchilem Eloheinu Yeshua, v'ateret nitzachon te'atrem, v'natata shalom ba'aretz v'simchat olam leyoshveha, v'nomar Amen. May be seated. We continue, page 181, the Ashrei chanted responsively.
Ashrei Ashrei Beitecha, Yahallelu Chasela. Tehillah leDavid Mimcha Elohai HaMelech, V'avarcha Shimcha le'olam va'ed. Gadol Adonai mulal me'od, v'ligdulato ein cheker. Hadar kavod hodecha, v'divrei niflotecha asicha. Zecher av tuvcha yabiu, v'tzidkascha yiraninu. Tov Adonai lakol, v'rachamav al kol ma'asav. Kevod malchutcha yomeru, gvuratcha yedaberu. Malchutcha malchut kol olamim, umemshaltecha b'chol dor v'ador. Einecho elecha yisaberu, v'ata noten lahem et ochlam b'ito. Tzadik Adonai b'chol drachav, v'chasid b'chol ma'asav. Ritzon yirei av yaseh, v'yet shavatam yishma v'yoshiyim. Tehillat Adonai yedaber piv, yivarech kol basar shem kodsho le'olam va'ed. V'anachnu nevarech ya me'ata v'ad olam. Hallelujah.
Page 183, we rise for the conclusion of the Torah service.
Yeah, hallelujah, et Shem Adonai, ki nizkar shemo levado, hodo al eretz v'shamayim, vayarem keren le'amo, tehillah lechol chasidav, Livnei Yisrael am kerovo. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Mizmor leDavid, avul Adonai. Kol Adonai el hamayim el hakavod hirim, Adonai al hamayim rabim. Kol Adonai ba'koach, Kol Adonai behadar, Kol Adonai shover arazim, Vayishaber Adonai et arzei halvanon, Vayarkidim kmo egel levanon, V'siryon kemo v'nereimim. Kol Adonai chotzev lavotesh, Kol Adonai yachil midbar, Yachil Adonai midbar kadesh, Kol Adonai yecholel hayalot, Vayechesof yarot uvehechalo kulo merkavod, Adonai lam habuya, Shavayishev Adonai, Melech leolam, Adonai oz le'amo yiten, Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom. Uvnucho yomar, Et Chaim hi lama chazikim ba, V'tomcheha meushar, Tiracheha tarechenon, V'chol netivoteha Shalom, Hashivenu Adonai, Elecha v'nashuva, Chadesh, Chadesh Yameinu, Chadesh Yameinu kekedem.
May be seated. First of all, it's great to hear people singing Eitz Chaim Hi. It's a nice feeling. It's always been one of my favorite moments of the service, standing in front of the ark and like the peak number of people there when we put the Torah away. Good to see all of you. It felt different this time. That's the phrase that I've heard, that I have read many times, that I felt myself over the last 2 weeks during this most recent engagement between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. Something was different. We've been through this particular show before, remarkably similar each time. Comparatively, this round of fighting was not as bad as the last one. It took less time, and the IDF didn't actually go into Gaza. So what was it that felt different? What felt different was the response to the IDF's bombardment of Gaza. It felt overwhelmingly like the world had turned against Israel. Countries had turned against Israel, leaders had turned against Israel. Our neighbors, people on social media, had turned overwhelmingly against Israel. I would, of course, caution to not take what is seen on social media to represent a large number of people, but it was quite a lot this week, and it felt different. Jews, people who cared about the state of Israel, really felt under attack this week. We didn't have a leg to stand on. And in light of that, it's worth analyzing, it's worth talking about how we feel about Israel, how we view this round of fighting between Israel and Hamas. I, of course, first want to promote and thank the Federation of Charlotte, Jewish Federation of Charlotte, for putting together the incredible series of programs that we will have this week, including myself and other local clergy. to learn about what happened over the last 2 weeks. The three speakers will address really as many of the issues as we can possibly address. Daniel Gordis will talk about what actually happened, what precipitated this round. Noah Tishby will talk about social media and how it is used and what many Jewish teenagers likely to have experienced during this time. And Yossi Klein Halevi, who I am proud to point out is actually my cousin, will be speaking about what it means to him to be a Zionist and help us talk about what it means to be a Zionist, to be a supporter of the state of Israel today. But I wanted to talk about it from the religious perspective this morning. Now, even though we're 2 weeks into the book of Bamidbar, the story that was on my mind this week is from the beginning of the book of Shmot, the beginning of the book of Exodus. Moses goes out from the palace and observes an Egyptian beating an Israelite man. He looks this way and that to see who else is around, and then kills the Egyptian man in defense of the Israelite. Why? The story raises any number of questions that commentators have asked. Why was the Egyptian striking the Israelite in the first place? Why did Moses interfere? Why did Moses look this way and that? Was he checking to see who was watching, or was he looking to see if there was anybody else who was about to stand up and defend the Israelite? Why did he kill the Egyptian when the Egyptian was only said to be hitting Makeh, the Israelite? Was it, to use a common term this week, a proportional response? We all come up with our own answers, but none of us really know because we were not there. So I use this story to help me think about this most recent round of fighting between Israel and Hamas, but really it holds true for any of the similar engagements since Hamas came to power in 2005. I also share today some of my feelings on this topic. I am still new to this congregation, and this was the first Israel-related crisis during my time, so I'll give you an idea of where I stand. I made my first trip to Israel at 5 years old, and my mom remembers that throughout the very long plane ride, I constantly was asking her over and over again, are we in Eretz Yisrael yet? Are we in the land of Israel? I've made over 20 trips to Israel and thought at various points about making Aliyah. So it saddens me to admit that while I care deeply about the country and the people who live there, I have no real solutions to offer in the search for peace in the Middle East. I believe that 2 states for 2 people is the best way to keep Israel safe and to preserve both the Jewish and democratic qualities of a country that is very different from our own. I even have no problem with that Palestinian state being built on land that was part of what we call biblical Israel, because I'm more interested in the modern state of Israel. And I resent groups of Jews who publicly shame Judaism by their cruelty to Palestinians. But at the same time, I don't believe that a Palestinian state that lives peacefully side by side with Israel is a realistic proposition. We know there is no leadership in the West Bank or in Gaza that is willing to do the hard work of building the infrastructure needed to maintain a state. So instead, they launch attack after attack against Israel, continue to demonize Israelis as a distraction from their own failures. The state of Israel during all this does what it needs to do to contain threats from Gaza and rules over a population in the West Bank that despises it. I consider myself to be very middle of the road in these matters, influenced both by how much I love the Jewish homeland and by the recognition that if the status quo stays the same, we will continue to have blow-ups over holy sites and rounds of warfare like we've experienced over the last 2 weeks. I know what I want the future to look like, but I have no idea how to get there. I also believe we can take great comfort in knowing that Israel possesses the finest military and defensive technology in the Middle East. And although many Israelis may be endangered by Hamas rocket fire, the state itself is not in danger like it was in 1948, 1967, or 1973, those years that we remember in Israel's history. Israel is a contradiction that is hard for many people to understand because it doesn't fit into a neat box. It is both powerful and vulnerable at the same time. I actually find myself this week very concerned about Jewish people as an entity here in America. We know all too well that attacks against Israel are often a socially acceptable cover for anti-Semitism. But sometimes people drop the cover. The ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, found an increase in online and real-world incidents of anti-Semitism in the US during this round of fighting. Between May 7th and May 14th, more than 17,000 tweets used some form of the expression, "Hitler was right," and the organization received 190 reports of possible anti-Semitic incidents during the same time period, considerable rise from the weeks before. We had a small reprieve from worrying about anti-Semitism during the pandemic, but we're reminded this past week that it is still there, waiting for a reason, waiting for a pretext to come out. And the revival of anti-Semitism is a reminder that Theodor Herzl, the founder of political Zionism, was right, that the only place where Jews could live without fear of a government or of their neighbors turning on them is in a Jewish state. The founding thesis of Zionism has been proven over and over again. But perhaps more than external hate, I was upset this week by the reaction of Jews to the latest round of fighting. As large parts of the world did turn against Israel, as it seems like public opinion was overwhelmingly blaming Israel for this crisis, it's only natural to question ourselves and our values. It's human, it's even Jewish, to see the scenes of destruction in Gaza, to read about children who died in Israeli missile strikes, and to feel conflicted, to feel horrified, even to wonder if it was necessary. Jewish tradition has always cautioned us not to rejoice in the death or destruction of an enemy and to limit collateral damage in wartime. The problem, however, is when Jewish people go even farther, when we stop caring about other Jewish people. Typical of this mindset was a very dispiriting letter signed by close to 100 rabbinical students from different seminaries. Included in this letter were statements like this: "This year, American Jews have been part of a racial reckoning in our community. Our institutions have been reflecting and asking, how are we complicit with racial violence? Jewish communities, large and small, have had teach-ins and workshops, held vigils, and commissioned studies. And yet so many of those same institutions are silent when abuse of power and racist violence erupts in Israel and Palestine. So many of us ignore the day-to-day indignity that the Israeli military and police forces enact on Palestinians and sit idly by as Israel upholds two separate legal systems for the same region. And in the same breath, we are shocked by escalations of violence as though these things are not a part of the same dehumanizing status quo." Response, I say, American Jews should be proud that we have used our ancient teachings to further causes of social justice and to fight for others. But we are missing something if we cannot express the same concern for our own, for fellow Jewish people. Their letter, and similar thoughts expressed this week, failed to take into account anything about the physical and the immense emotional suffering of Israelis threatened by rocket fire, of families had to pick up children and run in the middle of the night over and over again to bomb shelters, refused to lay any blame on the door of Hamas, an organization that has terrorized its own people as well as Israelis. Such Jews have bought wholeheartedly into the narrative of Israel as villain that has become so easy to spread. The idea for us of Klal Yisrael, of a greater people of Israel who are related to each other across the world, is one of the beliefs that has kept us in existence through centuries of persecution. And it's not only a tool for survival, but it is a value in and of itself. The Talmud teaches an important principle when it comes to charity. Aniyei ircha kodmin. The poor of your own city should come before of another city. While the Talmud was talking about financial aid, the same principle holds true when it comes to concerns over safety. We have to be concerned about Jews in other countries because if we don't take responsibility for them, who else will? It's a Jewish value that is often forgotten in a world where, for many people, Judaism is defined, and rightfully so, by a desire of improving other people's lives. For me, it's impossible to look at any situation and take concerns for other Jewish people out of the equation. So returning to my question about the story of Moses, why was the Egyptian striking the Israelite? Not because the Israelite did something wrong, we don't know what happened right before, but because we know how the story goes. The Egyptians had already decided that they hated the Israelites and were determined to act on that hatred. Why does Hamas attack Israel? Evictions in Sheikh Jarrah may be a pretext, but they attack because they hate the success of Israel as compared to their repeated failure. What was Moses looking for before killing the Egyptian? He looked around and saw that no one else was going to help the endangered Israelite, so he did it himself. What do we look around for in the world? We look around and we see that Jewish people are respected, are loved here in the United States. Our relationship with our neighbors is better than any diaspora community has ever been. But we also see that Israeli citizens are again in danger, and few will stand up for them in the court of public opinion. Did Moses respond proportionally to the Egyptian? I don't know. I wasn't there. I assume he judged the situation as best he could. Has Israel responded proportionally to the rocket attacks from Gaza? I don't know. It certainly doesn't look that way, the way it's described on the news. But I'm also willing to give Israel the benefit of the doubt that they judged the situation as best they can. It's not always easy, but may we always find the space in our hearts to give our brothers and sisters the benefit of the doubt. I mentioned Moses, leader of the Jewish people, strong-willed, tough, sometimes contrasted with his brother, Aaron, who we refer to in our tradition as a Rodef Shalom, a pursuer of peace. So I conclude with this prayer written by Rabbi Dr. Bradley Artson, Dean of the Spiegler School of Rabbinic Studies in Los Angeles, in response to the rabbinical student letter, some of whom were his own students. May the God of Abraham, the father of Ishmael and of Isaac, grant us the wisdom to be disciples of Aaron, loving peace and pursuing peace, defending our homeland as a catalyst for renewed Jewish life, and reaching out the hand of friendship and partnership to Palestinians who share our commitment to nonviolence, to self-determination, and to justice. May the one who makes peace in the heavens grant peace to us, to all Israel, and to all humankind, and let us say, Amen. We continue with the Musaf service, the middle of page 184. Please rise.
יתקדש ויתקדש שמי רבה בעלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי בחיי חונו ומכונו וחיי תורו בית ישראל בגלה ובזמן קריב יאמרו אמן יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם לא מהמיה יפרח יפרח וישתבח ויפאר ויתרומם וינשא ויתהדר ויתלבש בנקודשה בריחו לילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה תמירן מהמה וימרו
Amen. We begin the Musaf Amidah together, page 185.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואמותינו אלוהי אברהם, אלוהי יצחק ואלוהי יעקב, אלוהי שרה, אלוהי רבקה, אלוהי רחל ואלוהי לאה. האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל עליון, גומל חסדים טובים וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסרי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גואל לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ופוקד ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ופוקד שרה, אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, בחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע. מוריד אתה, מכלכל חיים בחסד, בחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ברופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו, לשני עפר. מי כמוך בגבורות, ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישוע, רמנת על החיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי המתים. נעריצך ונקדישך, כסוד שיח שרפי קודש, המקדישים שמך בקודש, ככתוב היה נביאך, וקרא זה ואמר, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך כל הארץ. כבודו כבודו מלא עולם, משאר טוב שואלים זה לזה, איה מקום כבודו נאומתם. ברוך יאמרו, ברוך כבוד אדוני, ממקומו הוא יפן ברחמים, ויחונם המייחדים שמו, ערב ובוקר בכל יום תמיד. המים באהבה, שמה אומרים, שמה ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני הוא אלוהינו, הוא אבינו, הוא מלכנו, מושיענו, והוא ישמיענו ברחמיו שנית, ברחמיו שנית, לעיני כל חי, והוא ישמיענו ברחמיו שנית, ברחמיו שנית, לעיני כל חי. להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, ובדברי קודשך כתוב לאמור, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהי ציון לדור ודור, הללויה, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד, ולנצח נצחים, ולנצח נצחים, קדושתך נקדיש, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד גולך, ולנצח נצחים, ולנצח נצחים, קדושתך נקדיש. בשבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד, כי אל מלך גדול וקדוש אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
Continue silently.
שים שלום, שים שלום, שים שלום, טובה וברכה, חן וחסד ברחמים, עלינו ועל כל ישראל עמך, שים שלום, שים שלום, שים שלום, טובה וברכה, חן וחסד ברחמים, עלינו ועל כל ישראל עמך, וטוב בעיניך לברך את עמך ישראל, בכל עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. שים שלום, שים שלום, שים שלום, טובה וברכה, חן וחסד ברחמים, עלינו ועל כל ישראל עמך, שים שלום, שים שלום, שים שלום, טובה וברכה, חן וחסד ברחמים, עלינו ועל כל ישראל עמך, ברוך אתה אדוני, המברך את עמו ישראל בשלום, שים שלום, שים שלום, שים שלום.
Page 203, Kaddish Shalem.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ועמד יברח חילוצי במדינת מלכותי בחיי כל נביא מכל נבחרי רבית ישראל, בגלה ובזמן קריב אמרו אמן, יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם לא מעלמיה, Yiparach, Yiparach, Vishabach, Vipar, Vitorman, Vina, Sevi, Cesar, Vitala, Vitala, Shmeri, Kucha, Brichu, Leil, Lamin, Kobechata, Vishirata, Jubata, Nachmata, Demiran, Miama, Vimru, Amin, Tikabat, Son of Alton to Israel, Kodam, Abuhun, Vishmai, Vimru, Amin, Ishamarab, Minchmai, Vahemlin, Velko Israel, Vimru, Amin, Ose Shalom, Bimro, Mafuyase, Shalom, Aleinu, Velko Israel, Velko Yoshvete, Vel, Vimru, Amin. Amen. En Eloheinu, en Kadonenu, en Kemakenu, en Kemoshienu, mi Eloheinu, mi Kadonenu, mi Kemakenu, mi Kemoshienu, Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adonenu, Nodel Malkenu, Nodel Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu. Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, Atahu Shektiru, Avotenu, Lefanecha Eketoret Hasamim.
We rise for Aleinu 205.
Aleinu l'shabeach ladon hakol, latit gedula lioter breshit, shelo asanu kegoye haratzot, velo samanu k'mishpachot ha'adama, shelo sam chelkinu kahen, v'goralinu kechol hamonam, v'anachnu korim u'mishtachavim u'modim, לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסר הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינת זו בגבי מרומים, הוא אלוהינו איnon, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, הכתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום בהשבות אל לבבך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים, השמיים ממעל, והארץ מתחת עינות, רק נקבל חנונים לרומר ולברזל. המלכות שלך עולמי תמלוך בכבוד, ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו
Seated, page 207. This Shabbat, we mark the yortzites of Gussie Zimmerman, Joseph Leibovitz, Minna Goldstein, Michael Rotberg, Harry Snitz, Emil Goldsmith, Gloria Wolfowitz, Abraham Leach, Merle Weiss, Lillian Solomon, Arthur Wolf, Ben Oran, Yaakov Valinsky, Benjamin Shapiro, Theodore Isaacs, Dorothy Baumgarten, Ellen Friedman, Michael Sherman, Rosalind Sherman, Monica Thorpe, Hi Horn, Abraham Lichten, Shelley Bregman, Sonia Rappaport, Julius Goldstein, Aline Strauss, Bernard Greenspan, Alexander Baikovitz, Hilda Burson, Harry Spritzman, Bernice Roberts, Samuel Queskin, Shelton Gorelick, Ruben Bilski, Sidney Mackler Newman, Mert Freeman, Donald Nicholson, Gitta Hilda Lasker, Bud Wolf, Molly Luftglass, and Sarah Levy-Strauss. Page 207, I invite those in mourning or marking a yortzeit to rise and join me in the mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah, Bialma divera kirute viamlich malchute. Bechayechon uviomechon uvchaye dechol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shemei rabba mevorach leolam ulameo maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei dekudsha brichu le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata tush bechata v'nechamata damiran v'yalma v'yimru amen yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen oseh shalom bimromav v'yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei tevel v'yimru amen. May be seated. Call on our president, Teresa Brenner, for some words of greeting.
For leading us in services, and Rabbi Walk for your very thoughtful sermon, Sean Seifert for his audiovisual expertise, Aaron Goldstein for serving as Zoom Gabbai, and Steve and Debbie Moore for serving as our greeters. Next week, we will celebrate the bar mitzvah of Ben Spiegler, son of Karen and Jason Spiegler. Ben will participate in Kabbalat Shabbat services on Friday evening and lead us in Saturday morning services at 9:30 a.m. Please join Ben and his family in celebrating his Simcha. Yasher Koah to each of this morning's Aliyot honorees, Torah and Haftorah readers, Perry Tannenbaum, Art Roth, Dan Biber, David Strauss, Eric Levine, Irving Brenner, Elliot and Stephanie Meadow, Elias and Linda Rushfard, Bill Gorelick, Stephen and Janice Sachs, Kieran Brodsky, and a special thank you to our Hagba and Galila, Brian and Ezra and Aria Adlitz. We are delighted with the CDC and North Carolina governor's recent announcements and the expansion of COVID-19 vaccines to those ages 12 and older. We are actively planning for changes in our procedures, which we will announce very soon. So stay tuned to your email for next week. You'll see some announcements coming from us. This is the time we have been waiting for during these past 14 months. Please join us tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. for our Temple Israel annual meeting. The link for the meeting may be found in the email that was sent yesterday before Shabbat and also on our website. During this meeting, you will elect officers and members of the Board of Trustees, see highlights from the past year in a video montage, hear from Tommy Mann, your treasurer, about the financial health of our synagogue, and celebrate all the good from this past year. You will also want to take a peek at the link to the annual report, which has pictures and letters in an electronic version. And then at noon, please join virtually the first of the 3 speakers on Charlotte Stands with Israel, sponsored, as the rabbi said, by the Charlotte Jewish Federation. Details were shared this morning by Rabbi Wolk and also in his email and weekly video that was sent before Shabbat. Join Temple Israel for Torah Tots Picnic Shabbat on June 4th at 5 p.m., featuring Director of Congregational Education, Rabbi Kornsgold and Mr. Caleb, with music and pre-boxed pizza dinners with gluten-free alternatives. The deadline to register is May 31st. If you have questions, please call the synagogue office and Sue Ann will happily assist you. Thank you also this morning to Rabbi Helene Kornsgold, who led the Getel Zion class, the B'nai Mitzvah class essentially, had a get-together and service this morning outside in our beautiful courtyard garden and sanctuary. It was the first time that that class was able to all be together physically in one space, so that was a very nice event for them this morning. After Shabbat, please see our website, Kol Israel, in your weekly email for complete information about in-person services, the Zoom link in the stream spot box, and upcoming events. We offer many opportunities for services, learning, community, and friendship. Please join us. Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom. Thank you, Teresa. We conclude our Shabbat service with Adon Olam, page 211.
Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra Li'ed Nasa B'chefto Kol Azai Melech Shemoni לבדו ימלוך נורא, והוא היה והוא הווה, והוא יהיה בתפארה, והוא יהיה בתפארה, והוא אחד ואין שני, להמשילו, להכבירה, בלי ראשית, בלי תכלית, ולא העוז והמשרה, ולא העוז והמשרה, והוא אלי וחי גואלי וצור חבלי ביצרה, והוא ניסי ומנוס לי מנת כוסי ביום מקרא, מנת כוסי ביום מקרא, בידו הפקיד רוחי בעת תישן ויעירה, ואם רוחי כביעתי אדוני לי ולא יירא, אדוני לי ולא יירא.
Please rise for Kiddush. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. על כן ברך אדוני יום השבת ויקדשהו, סברי מרנן ורבנן ורבותיי. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן לחיים. שבת שלום.
שבת שלום.